Good morning, members, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. We have 3 members within the room, and I suppose we'll get to Claire in a minute in regards to the said and apologies. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available for viewing through our Council's website. Can I please remind you of a few of the arrangements in the good guidance note? Microphones should be muted and videos switched off when you are not addressing the meeting. You should wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function, and you will be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should you wish questions or issues to be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we can deal with the business as efficiently as possible, especially in the run-up to the Christmas. Our usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by a roll call, and if any members has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or you could write leave in the Teams chat function and then join. This is required to allow us to record members' presence, and please do not use the chat function for any contributions that are material to our debate as part of the considerations of the reports in front of us. So it is over to you now, Claire. It's said and apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any apologies this morning. As you said, we've got 3 members present in the Council Hall, being yourself, Councillor Scobie, Councillor Thompson. Currently, 2 members not present, being Councillors Karen Crothers and Councillor Ronnie. All other members present on Teams.
Thanks so much for that, Claire. My understanding is both will be joining the meeting at some point later on. Both members, Councillor Crothers and Ronnie. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest? No members in the room have any declarations of interest. I'll give it a few seconds. I see you've joined, and you have to make a declaration of interest. Jane?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that in item number 7, one of the random samples that was made was about the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and I think I probably ought to declare that I am a member of the Scottish Wildlife Trust. However, I don't think I require to leave the meeting. I just need to let you know.
Thanks for that, Jane. Much appreciated. I don't see any other hands raised or comments within the chat function that we've got. We'll move on to item number 3, which is minute of the previous meeting of 21st of September 2021. This is here for approval. Have any members got a different view, I should say, in regards to what's been reflected within the minute? I would move that it is a true reflection of the previous meeting. Agreed? Excellent. Agreed within the room. Don't see anybody coming in virtually. So item number 4 is scrutiny review outcomes achieved from council investment in the Public Social Partnership and Community Transport report by the Head of Governance and Assurance. Let's see who's leading on this one. Vlad, is it you? Fraser Davis. Fraser, this is you. Over to you, Fraser.
Thank you for that, Chair. Just want to highlight for this review, I think it was a good review. The partner organisations of the PSP were exceptionally positive about what it's enabled them to achieve. And the only kind of thing I think which was perhaps highlighted was that the council is actually the only partner which funds the PSP. So whilst they were exceptionally positive, we were the only ones actually putting money into it. But I'm happy to open up to members and take in any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Fraser. Unfortunately, I think I missed the last one. But Stephen, I know you've got a keen eye on this. This was your actual suggestion, if I remember correctly, that come forward as a scrutiny review. So I can put that to you first. You'd obviously be involved in regards to the workshops and so on. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate there's other members wanting to come in, but no, it was good that we got a proper look at this, and I welcome the report in front of us. I think I would concur that I think we're, by exception, the only real funder of this, and it would be good to, I don't know if we can escalate or elevate this to the likes of the community planning partnership through the proper channels to maybe entreat upon the other sort of agencies to recognise the value of community transport towards their service delivery, and maybe, through the IJB or NHS, whatever it might be, there's maybe mechanisms they could consider to try and support something like this, because it certainly seems to benefit the region and the communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. I suppose I'll come back to just to make sure that the emerging recommendations that you're aligned to them, just with being your particular subject matter. So we've got Archie, you're next.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Hope you can hear me all right.
We can, loud and clear, Archie.
That's great. I'm just coming to the emerging recommendations, Chair, with regards recommendation 3 and recommendation 4. In particular, recommendation 4, the annual funding of 13,595 allocated to community transport should be invested in the PSP as it offers the best value for money. But in recommendation 3, the service should bring a paper to the relevant committee in 2022-23 with a cost-benefit analysis, both financial and carbon, of potential ways to further reduce the carbon footprint of the PSP. So I think obviously we are the only funders of the PSP, which we're happy to do so. But if the service is bringing a paper to the relevant committee with a cost-benefit analysis, surely the recommendation 4 should be in with recommendation 3 to make sure that the best value for money is actually in that, and what the rationale behind all that is, including, and I would agree with Councillor Thompson about taking that to the Community Planning Partnership and things like that as well, and other organisations who should fund, including the NHS.
Thanks for that, Archie. Fraser, have you got any comments in regards to that?
I'll just come in regarding Councillor Driver's point about recommendation 4. 3 is a financial and carbon analysis specifically relating to the carbon footprint of the PSP, whereas recommendation 4 is just that sort of wider funding point. So just I don't know if that offers any kind of clarity for members.
If I can go back in. The situation with regards, the investment. I mean, I don't have any problem with the investment, and but if there's going to be a paper to the relevant committee with cost-benefit analysis, whether it's carbon footprint of the PSP, but it does say both financial and carbon as well in recommendation 3. So I would suggest that the 5 emerging recommendations to get reduced to 4. But include recommendation 4 within 3.
Thanks, Archie. Just before you come back in, Fraser, so when I was reading that, my understanding, I didn't make all the meetings, but there was a further conversation at Swestrans which I attended. So when I looked at 2.4, I thought that's a meagre in the first case. A meagre, I think Andy Leslie used to give probably triple amount just alone as an area committee to the one in the east of the region, Andy Lesdale. But I thought it was a small amount of funds, actually, but I think that figure should probably be driven, like you're saying, from recommendation 3. But I think that there was a discussion around about sustainability and should there be hydrogen driven or electric driven, and I think that was made about the carbon footprint. But I agree with what you're saying. So they were picked up in the conversation. I imagine this has come from the information that we've had at the time and the feedback from the community transport organisations and other stakeholders that were involved. But I would think that there is a further paper to come. But that figure for me was the only bit, Archie, where I just thought that was very light. And like I say, the comments at Swestrans in particular was that where it's commercial contracts that are, good to see Douglas here, commercial contracts are starting to reduce, where the PSP could actually potentially fill that gap was part of that. And you spoke to that, Douglas. So I just wondered if that was the kind of point it was trying to make there. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, if I can come in at that point, the 13,595 is the only core funding we have for community transport at the moment that's specific for community transport that the council holds. The PSP funding comes through the anti-poverty, the poverty money at the moment, so it's an annual bid into that. But certainly the plan is going forward that the PSP is mainstreamed into the new model development, which is a 2-year transition up to April 2024, and we'll be looking at all the carbon savings, etc. and that. But recommendation number 3 there, coming back to the relevant committee, will probably to Communities Committee with a paper relating to the funding, and particularly in relation, as Fraser has said, to the carbon aspect of that, as we agreed during the review. Hopefully that's some help, Chair.
It is for me. Archie, you come in and I didn't realise I've got quite a number of speakers now. Archie?
Yeah, I'll just clarify the position I have, Chair. Is I think that recommendation 3 and 4 should go together, because as Douglas actually says, there's going to be a report going to communities about this anyway. So therefore, I think it fits in taking 4 recommendations rather than the 5 recommendations. And that will give rationale behind all of the recommendations and the emerging issues that have come from this particular thing. I think on the subject of actually funding, we did have a lot of money in the early days in 2007, but of course all the budget cuts that we've had, from the relevant Scottish budget has affected that in a big way. I would love to give more to community partnership, but the issue is we've got the council budget to run.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Archie. So we've got Jane, you're next, then Councillor McKee, then Katie Hagman. I think it is Councillor Hagman. But Jane, you're first.
Thank you, Chairman. I was looking at page 21 of our papers with respect to the challenges, Chairman, that this service was facing. And we did hear from our contributors that the high costs identified were barriers, and in particular to organisations adopting the National Entitlement Card. And I wonder if we should actually make a little bit more of an exploration of this, because at the moment, I would suggest that this is discriminatory against rural and small community transport organisations. And I'm not absolutely certain how to tackle this, but I think it might well be through COSLA. I would take advice from officers and other members, but I can't help thinking that we should actually add this in some shape or form into the recommendations as a recognition of a challenge and try and do something about it.
Thanks for that, Jane. Fraser, do you want to just come back and make a comment regards to that? But I think between Fraser and Jane, you'll think of something by the time we get back to the recommendations, how we can incorporate that. Fraser?
Thank you, Chair. No, happy to kind of take into consideration adding a recommendation relating to the entitlement card.
Thank you. We'll come back to that.
And take bodies. I'm happy to add that in.
Thanks, Fraser. We'll come back to that. Jane, when we get to recommendations as a further, it may well be a fifth one because we'll probably join 3 and 4 together. So we have Councillor McKee next.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering if what Jane was saying is along the lines of what I was going to say. How are we purely looking at moving pedestrians, well, people in the buses into centres, or is it looking to do different things? Where I'm coming from is I just got there was a bid in for funding from Derek Hextall, actually, from a community transport point of view. They were wanting to get a bus and wanting money to insure it and this, that and the next thing. And it was for delivery of food and that sort of thing to the communities where there's a need for that sort of thing. Could that be fitted into what's happening with these community transport?
I'll put that to you, Fraser, if you don't mind.
If you don't mind, Chair, I might pass that one on to Douglas, if that's okay.
No problem, Douglas.
Yes, fine. Yes, and Councillor McKay, that is something that through the PSP, the Community Transport Operators, we were willing to look at. More than happy to look at different operating models. It's not just about, it's in the main moving people, but we can also move other items as well as benefit the community. So yes, absolutely no problem at all with that.
Could I just come back and ask if you could consult with Derek Hextall, Douglas, please, just to have an exchange of views and see where we go from there. Thanks very much.
Thank you both. We have Councillor Hagman next, Katie.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I just want to jump back to the point made by Archie in terms of recommendation 3 and 4 and combining those. And I would just put forward an alternative to keep those separate. Now, the reason why I think it's important to keep them separate is recommendation 3, the very last few words are further to reduce the carbon footprint of the PSP. And I would actually possibly suggest that we look back to what our council priorities are. And at the very front page, the first page, we've got our council priorities written out, and the final one is to urgently respond to climate change and transition to a carbon neutral region. And the second bullet point, I think, is the one that's key to recommendation 3, which is to empower our communities and stakeholders to make significant changes to reduce emissions and adapt to a low carbon approach. And I would perhaps suggest that we keep recommendation as it is up until the point it says, and that I'll read it out. So the service should bring a paper to the relevant committee in 22-23 with a cost-benefit analysis, both financial and carbon, of the potential ways to, and then instead of the writing further reduce carbon, to actually slot in what our priority is. So we should be empowering our communities and stakeholders to actually put in what our council priority is. And I just want to make sure that, you know, the recommendations go forward, that we actually really capture how important it is that our communities and all our stakeholders can really grasp hold of you know, the real severity and position that we're in as a region. We've made a climate emergency declaration. We should really be driving that forward at every opportunity. And I think recommendation 3 is the opportunity to drive it forward in this paper here. So that would be my request for the committee to consider that. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. I'm probably comfortable with that, but we'll come back to it between yourself and Archie probably to kind of thrash that one out. I just wonder, from a due diligence point of view, do any of the officers want to comment in regards to that particular statement? Makes sense to me that actually all we're doing is, I think you're saying we're adding in rather than, or maybe that's point of clarity, are we adding in the fifth priority and the second bullet point, I think is what you're saying in regards to that in particular?
Yeah.
That's an addition,
yes,
but we're still keeping the wording that's there. Katie, is that what you're saying at the end?
Well, no, I would. My suggestion is we remove the further reduce the carbon footprint of the PSP and actually slot in the empower our communities and stakeholders, where we could put empower the PSP to make significant changes to reduce emissions and adapt to a low carbon approach. So we're actually sticking with our own council priorities of what we're actually trying to achieve in terms of the local authority and our response to the climate change.
Makes sense to me. I wonder, from an official's point of view, due diligence, does it? And Douglas or Fraser, just to be absolutely sure.
Chair, yes, that's comfortable with that. It's the intention of that part of the recommendation was. So it's that wording, if it specifically relates back to the council priority, then that just makes it more explicit. So I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I agreed from my perspective as well, Chair.
Thank you both. Archie, I'm just got to come back to you before I move on to the next speaker, which is Willie.
Yeah, thanks for letting me back in, Chair. I think the rationale behind my suggestion is that it's got to go to the Communities Committee anyway. So, I mean, I've not got a problem with what Katie wants to put in with recommendation 3. All I'm saying is add in recommendation 4 to recommendation 3, so it both goes to the Communities Committee, because that's at the end of the day where the decision will actually be made. They've got to do their own scrutiny and all that side of things. So it's just to make sure that, you know, both the cost benefit analysis for financial and carbon is taken into consideration at that committee.
Thank you. Just on one small point, I'll come back to you, Katie, on that, and then Willie, I will come back to you then. Just so I get this wee bit thrashed out, and then we know we're moving on. 2.3 of our recommendation says to agree to submit the final report to full council at its meeting of the 31st of March. So it may well go back to the Communities Committee, actually, but the only point, it may well end up as a budget proposal as well. So I'm probably looking for a bit of due diligence as well. I mean, it could be either or, and I'm not being pedantic here, I'm just trying to, I think, facilitate. Does it sit separately better potentially, or does it sit explicitly, this can only come back to Communities Committee? I think there is other options.
I think regardless which committee it goes to, Chair, it's got to be a report to either full council or communities or whoever, and looking at the due diligence of this, it's, you know, it would be part of any report going forward. As I say, I've not got any issues with what Katie's wanting to add into recommendation 3. I think as part of any report going forward, we want to make sure that we capture both recommendation 3 and 4 and put it into one recommendation so that it's captured and can be taken forward.
Right, thank you. I might come up with a proposal just to remove the figure, and that might, so the annual funding allocated to community transport should be invested in the PSP as it offers the best value for money, which it does, and we understand that. That might be an option. We'll come back to that though. Willie?
Yeah, Chair, a great deal has been said in terms of value, and I come back to the point that Stephen made at the beginning, in terms of that maybe shouldn't, or it should not only be the council that's looking at this, but the value that it gives to the whole community. So the community partnership, maybe the option here, and to build that into recommendation 4, because, you know, throughout the document it talks in value, and on page 20. The PSP has social value, not only to enabling access to health care, but in preventing individuals who may not be able to use public transport from becoming isolated. So Douglas referred to the anti-poverty, but again, that's a bidding process. If we see this as a priority and a delivery of service, then I think we should be looking at it in terms of what our priorities are and how it's going to be funded. And it's interesting to look at the barriers that Jane referred to in 21. And again, we look at engaging with the South of Scotland enterprise and how it could provide any source of funding to provide for community transport in all that it delivers. So I think we need to look at recommendation 4, not only to look at this, no matter what committee it goes to, but also how do we expand that to take in the other services, health, community partnership, and so forth. So, you know, it's a pitiful amount of money to try and run a service that so much value is put on.
I agree with your last statement entirely. I'm sure I can reflect back to, going back to the earlier days of first election, but 2008-9, I'm sure the NHS were putting in Arndale Estelle alone in about £50,000 a year. Then you had the council's contribution, so on and so forth. So it's dropped in the priorities due to cuts, as Archie's already alluded to, wherever they've come from. I'm just wondering if I'm going to come back to you, Stephen, just to prepare you to get your thoughts on this, because ultimately this will be it was your suggestion. And I am thinking, because of the level of contribution today, I'll take governance advice as well. We have got another meeting in February, and this is going to the March committee. It might be an option just to reflect on what everybody's saying, present a short, brief level of recommendation to the February committee, unless we can come to a conclusion today. But I'll bring you in first, Stephen, just to see if you've got any further thoughts. Because, well, you've made statements, you've added value, and I think we've grasped them, not looking for any points of clarity. I'll come back to you, Stephen, because obviously this was your suggestion at the time. I'd like to make sure your stamp's on this when it goes to full council.
Thanks, Chair. I think there's other people wanting to come in and speak, and I welcome you inviting me to add to this, but really I suppose my intention was to open the door so that the discussion could happen and elected members could feed in and we could get this knowledge in front of us with a view to how best to take it forward. So this is way more than what I could have come up with, if you see what I mean, because it's, you know, it's sort of greater than the sum of the parts for any individual. So I'm happy with what's in front of us. I'm happy to have heard the discussion, and I'm glad that there's been a lot more brought to this than what I'd foreseen in my small brain, you know what I mean? So I'd rather allow this to unfold without taking any... I'm not precious about ownership of it. I'm just glad that it's been discussed and it can get taken forward. So happy to let others come in, Chair, if that's okay.
No problem, I didn't. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I'm not sure. It's Kate. I think you've been addressed. From what I can see, I'm just looking on here. It looks like John Young's next. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that correct? Yep, aye, John. Sorry, I'll let you, John. And I suppose just from my perspective, Stephen, probably an offline discussion of what we have. But when it goes to full council, we'll expect you to have the main discussion on this rather than myself. Just because it's only, I think it's only fair you get the recognition for it, bringing it forward. But John, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very full discussion and a lot of excellent comments have been made, and I echo Councillor Maitland's views that the ability to have the national entitlement card usage on community transport should be investigated further. But the point I want to make very briefly on page 21, it says, engage with the South of Scotland as a potential avenue for funding. I think we need to be more direct on that. Who will do this engagement with the South of Scotland? Is it the community transport organisations, or is it us as Dumfries and Galloway Council? I think we need to be more specific here, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Douglas has got to answer that, please.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Young. We are the PSP as a project manager, it only works one day a week, but we are already engaged with the South of Scotland agency, and I was just going to update actually following Councillor Scobie's comment, as we actually managed to get some grant funding for this financial year, which following our previous meetings on this subject matter, we managed to get £106,000, which were spread across the employability aspects of what we're doing, the transport hub software, and looking at an electric vehicle as well. So that's for this year, and there's further funding bids in for the next financial year as well. So we are already engaged with the South of Scotland enterprise, and we will continue to do that as part of the project going forward, as long as we're funded, Chair.
Thank you. So just to bring us to a conclusion, I'm looking at what's in the chart function, and Jane's contributed this. He suggested wording, but it's open to change. Any report going forward should consider how best to collaborate locally and nationally to reduce the high cost to organisations adopting the use of the national entitlement card. So, and I'm getting a thumbs up from Douglas at that. But I think because of the level, I suppose I'll choose my language as correctly as I can, but I think it's been a rich contribution from members this morning. There's a lot to take in, a lot to consider. We're looking at particular recommendations that we'll make to the full council. I don't think we could try and do ad hoc today and build it in and come to a conclusion, but I think it'd be far better just to reflect on it. That would be my proposal. Take it in consideration what's been said by all members. We can listen back to it and get just a very brief, short report outlining what reflects quite clearly the sum of all the parts, as Stephen would put it, but actually kind of a more clear and concise. This is like the rounding up of, here it is, the recommendations, and ultimately that would fit in with the cycle going to March full council, I would have thought. I'll move that as a proposal, if members are okay with it, unless you're desperate to wrap this up today for some reason. But it would be a quick, fast, short report, and members would obviously be involved in that. You'd see the suggested recommendations. Archie saying agreed. Do we have anybody else who would be contrary to that? So we have captured it. We can listen back to the recording. These 5 recommendations, you'll probably get options on what best reflects, but especially between what Archie's proposed and Katie's proposed. But there's been a lot of other well-intended and good comments that have been made. I think you've picked up on that, Stephen, in particular. So we've got no dissent. We'll move on to the next item. So if recorded that, we'll get another. We'll just come back to you, Vlad, just for absolute clarity.
If I could, Chair, just to confirm from a governance end that what we're agreeing is that there should be a further report, in essence encompassing what's been suggested by members today, that would come back to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny. Now, in terms of that timeline, obviously that will delay things in terms of eventually going to communities and thereafter, because if it has to come back here again before it goes to any other committee, or are we suggesting that it should go to communities alongside coming back to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny?
I think what I'm looking at, sorry, you should come right in, Claire, but I'm looking at 2.3 in particular, which says agree to submit the final report to full council at its meeting. I think that, if I remember correctly, unless I'm wrong, Claire, but that's our kind of, so we'd reflect to full council on the back of the decision at full council, then they would put back to full council says that's what's happening, then it would go back to communities and such like after that, or it might go through the budget process, just depending. That's my understanding. So I'm only thinking, the deadline we've really got to meet here, I think, is the 31st of March, full council. So because we've got one in early February, I like report, like just as you've outlined, Vlad. That was my thoughts, unless I'm wrong.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. I can confirm putting another report up to the February meeting of this committee won't delay it at all, because you're looking at the March full council date.
Thanks very much for that clarity. Thank you, Claire. Willie, sorry, apologies.
Just a clarity under an S recommendation 3 I'm looking at, and the service should bring a paper to 2022, and then it goes on to say cost-benefit analysis. So it's not just cost-benefit analysis, but what the services would cost across the region, because as you rightly said, it started, or I well remember, Wigtonshire Community Transport and the monies that we gave to them. And I think there's an added bit, there was a timely intervention for Douglas there in terms of how they have sourced other funding. I think he said 106,000 from somewhere else, but I think we need to identify the level of funding that is needed, and also where the sources are to get that money that we require. So not only are we looking for the paper to do that, but also to identify where we can get the funding, so that we know what pressure there is on the budget if that's necessary.
Yep, so I'll come right back to you as well, Stephen. My understanding is if a set of recommendations that reflects what's the conversation of today, so Jane picked up on that particular point, I think, and other things, so have other members, so that should be reflected. But in fact, you've commented there now, the listen back recorded, so I think you're absolutely right. So it isn't just about capturing the core funding, and Archie's touched on that as well. I think the core funding for the council should be maintained, is what they're saying, but actually you need to branch out, look at others, can see what it is, and that's been absolutely implicit through this conversation. I think that's been captured. Stephen, I've seen your hand going up there, I think.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just really just to strengthen Councillor Young's point about being clear about who is being asked to do what. So in the recommendations, some does specifically refer to, the council officers will, etc. Other times there might be a route through Swestrans, other times there might be basically identifying the particular person. So it's just to be really clear about that, because sometimes that's where things get lost. Thank you.
I'll try to put that in. I know I come across this all the time in my own business, and what people like is one point of contact, so they can hold that person accountable. So if it goes out to 5 different organisations, they're not interested, they have that one point of contact. So I wonder, how does that fit in with this from an accountability point of view? So we as elected members make decisions or make a recommendation to full council. Hopefully they agree with that, and if they do, from that accountability point of view that Stephen's picking up, so we might think, okay, it goes to Swestrans, it goes to communities, it goes to NHS, it goes to Partnership Board and so on and so forth. But what's our conduit? And come back in, Stephen, you think I've grasped the wrong side. So what's our conduit as elected members when we make a decision at full council that we're guaranteed that we really need a single point of contact, I would argue, that we can say, okay, is this happening? Because the more minutiae, for by the large organisations, we need to get assurance that that person, whether it's Douglas Kilpatrick under Swestrans or whether it's whoever it else may be, the Chief Officer under the Health or the NHS, how do we guarantee that coming back? I'll let you come back on that, Stephen, make sure that you're satisfied. Vlad. Okay, I'm just wondering, what is our point of... So, for us getting reassurance, I've not worded that correctly, obviously. For us getting a reassurance, Stephen's saying that, how can we guarantee it, unless I'm picking you up wrong, that, okay, we're saying we want X, Y and Z done, and there might be half a dozen people involved in that. how do we know for a fact? How do we hold them to account? I think is what you're saying. We make sure that the job's getting done. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, before the lad comes in.
I mean, yeah, that would be a good thing for it to happen. I think it's more just so that we're clear when we read a report, if it says so-and-so will be contacted, it's like, well, who's doing that? Are we saying that we would like Swestrans to take that forward because Swestrans is an outside body, you know, and we do have officers that have split roles, as it were, which is sometimes helpful and sometimes can be a challenge. So I think it's really just to get that sense of when we're looking at a report and we think we're dealing with other agencies, do we know where the point of contact is and how that gets traced through decision making and reporting? I don't know if that's kind of on the same point, really. But.
Yeah, I think I take on board the point in terms of who will be doing what within these actions. And if we're bringing this back to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny, I think that's certainly something we can maybe put finer detail on. In terms of that recommendation 3, it is on the service to do the report. That doesn't mean that there might not be other consultations and other things that might take place in the background, but ultimately it's for the service to do the report and bring that forward. So that I think that's relatively clear from my end in terms of who's doing that particular action. However, there will be others involved, and single point of contact in that case will be the service in terms of leading on that. So in terms of bringing that report back, I think what we are, if I got the gist of it, is that members want a bit more detail in terms of these 4/5 recommendations, and in essence to take on board the comments of members so that it can come back and then there can be agreement from the committee on how to take that forward.
I'm fine with that, Vlad. Stephen? Yep. I mean, obviously, come back to the service. You can go back to whether it's the director or the chief executive ultimately, but we should be able to hold them accountable. We can. The system's in place. But whether it's 4, whether it's 5, whether it's 10 recommendations after listening to it, I think it's whatever's needed to reflect in a most concise and consistent way we can towards full council. Okay, definitely the next item now. I see you've wrote speaking, but I think is that historical or not? No, go on, Claire.
All I was going to say, Chair, is as you were getting into discussions that follow up from scrutiny reviews, perhaps you could that might get discussed at item 6 when you're looking at the handbook as well, and the procedures there for the scrutiny reviews and follow-ups.
Excellent, thank you for that. There we go, and that was item number. Sorry, Mike's pressing wrong button. Item number 5 is a eligibility scrutiny review. It's a eligibility criteria and controls for the Town Centre Living Fund issued report by the Head of Governance. Fraser Davis and Jamie Little have got to speak on this one. Fraser?
Thank you, Chair. So I'd say again, this review highlighted that the council is receiving good value, degree of oversight and scrutiny of it. I think that covers really the main points of the review. It really was to confirm the eligibility criteria were enabling the council to deliver best value, which I think we found through numerous examples that it was. But I'm happy to open up to any questions, and I see Jamie's got his camera on as well to take any questions as well.
Thank you, Fraser, and welcome, Jamie. So we have Councillor Scobie. Was that previously? Are you wanting to speak now? No, I've got Archie. Is it you? Go on, Councillor Scobie, will it?
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at the report, and I'll preface this and say that any time I've been involved in this, I've always had the utmost support from Jamie. But I'm looking at the issues here under 3.3, bullet point 2, understanding the decision-making process and setting the criteria and the committee making the decisions. I go further on, and then on following page 4, it makes reference to the fact that the fund was limited and does not invest across the region. And again, I look at the recommendations, and in particular to recommendation 2, regular review of the criteria should remain to ensure the future regeneration and housing priorities can be pursued. I say this, and Jimmy and I had the discussion in terms of those properties that fall out with the criteria that we set ourselves in terms of what we regard as town centre, and the review of the criteria where there may be a property that's 100 yards beyond what is regarded as town centre. So it does come down to a very arbitrary measurement or definition of what town centre is. And I look at a couple of properties, because I don't know other areas, but in Scrutiny, like the old grain store, where the roof fell in and is now becoming a derelict property, and the other one, as you just come into Scrutiny, that's privately owned, but has been in a derelict state for an eyesore for a number of years. And I just wonder if this town centre living fund was an opportunity to say how we can bring these properties back into use, back into for housing for people who very much need it. But the thing that hinders it is the criteria that we put. The town centre is very defined to, this is a small area, and I can understand that not all the region, because there are not towns throughout the whole of the region. So it's really just the review of criteria and whether we've given enough scrutiny to that through audit and risk as to, are we getting the maximum opportunities and potential for this fund to bring properties back in.
Thanks for that. Well, it's an interesting point, actually. It's what level of flexibility is what I'm thinking is in regards to, is it a fine line? It's quite clear it's one side of the street gets it, so to speak, and the other side of the street doesn't get it. I wonder what flexibility is there, Jamie, just on that. I'm not wanting to ask Willie's questions. He's obviously asked it. I'll let you ask that. I'll probably come in the back of your answer, but Willie's making a point, and we'll probably come back to the recommendations, Willie, just to get that clarified as we move on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Scobie. I suppose in terms of the flexibility question, we have come back with reports to the Economy and Resources Committee and previously the Communities Committee, where projects have fallen out with that defined town centre, and members have been supportive of that approach. I think we recognise that housing doesn't necessarily need to be directly in the local development plan defined town centre to help support some of the retail and the commercial sector within that area. So we have come back with reports in the past to allocate funding to projects that do sit out with that boundary. Certainly something that recognises that it does provide some limitations, also recognising there's a limited amount of funding, and the opportunities that are in and around town centres do provide wide strategic objectives. But certainly on the point that Councillor Scobie makes there about other properties within communities, I think there's definitely an opportunity through the ongoing review of the criteria to make sure we're trying to pick up some of those buildings as well and come up with a solution, a workable solution to bring them back into use. There's certainly an approach that we can look to mirror from the Town Centre Living Fund across some more of the communities within Dumfries and Galloway.
Thanks, Jamie. Willie's happy with that, so we'll come back to the recommendations anyways. I think it's maybe a typo, but I'm not going to mention it because maybe I'll let Archie in first. You're next, Archie.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And I think this is a good report. It shows that the Town Centre Living Fund continues to operate, in a way that is slightly flexible. But I think just to come back on what Willie said as well, there is a derelict property report coming back to, I think it's full council once it's actually completed. And I think that would be appropriate to, include this in any future review of the actual Town Centre Living Fund. I just wanted to congratulate, Jamie on delivering this. Obviously, as the housing convener and as vice chair of E&R committee, we do get regular reports on the use of the fund, and it's down to members, of course, whether they want to support the project coming forward. And I would certainly say within some of the areas, like Lockerbie, for instance, it was out with the town centre for the Cunningham project. The police station in Langham was, quite a big stone throw. Jamie will remember from the town centre. But I think Willie's right. We need to look at right across Dumfries and Galloway for this particular thing. But it's just to say, I fully support this report, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Oh, sorry, Jamie, go on.
Sorry, no, Chair, wasn't looking to come in there. I mean, obviously, just while I have come in, though, just to say thanks very much to Councillor Driver for the positive comments, and certainly, as he mentioned, with the vacant and derelict strategy, there's a number of reports due to come back to committee as we keep members updated on the process around that work. But as has been pointed out, there's definitely an opportunity there to try and seek to utilise the funding that we do have for affordable housing purposes to also support the delivery of the vacant and derelict property strategy.
Thanks for that, Jamie. Sorry, I maybe spoke over Archie. If I did, Archie, I apologise for that. I thought it was yourself coming in there, Jamie. So Archie's also saying that he's content with the 3 recommendations from what I can see. So, Jane, you're next before I speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as well as this, we should congratulate Galloway on being attractive enough to provide the second homes monies.
You're frozen, Jane, if you can hear us. I don't know if it's your internet speed. Jane, if you can hear me, I don't know if you've dropped out maybe.
Sorry,
There you
sorry,
go.
Chairman.
There you go,
Yes,
Jane. Start. There you go. If you don't mind.
My machine.
Right.
My machine is down on me. I'm now on my phone. Sorry about that.
That's no problem, Jane. If you don't mind, just off. We got to how Galloway was attractive, and I think we kind of lost you at that point.
Right. Sorry about that. Yes, what I was saying is that the reason that we've got this money is because we've got an attractive area in Dumfries and Galloway, and in particular the western end. And what I think we should also add into this is just a very, very basic indication of how much money there is per annum, because anybody receiving this information and report, Chairman, would really not understand what we're dealing with, if that makes sense. So the 2 or 3 lines, just to give a little bit of indication, level of information about what we're talking about per annum and what we spend, I think would be useful just to put it in context. And I think the handbook indicates that it should actually be sufficiently informed so that people understand what they're talking about. I'm absolutely with the councillors who are talking about the derelict properties and eyesores. And I think, if anything, this review indicated just how important it is to tackle this. I know we're running 2 things together which don't actually necessarily belong together, but I'm glad that it's information flows from this about the need to look at derelict properties and to capitalise on the opportunities we've got to get private investment in to improve things for us. The final point is I was going to make was Councillor Scaby's point, regular review of the criteria. I agree with that, but I think we should specify how often that regular review is. And I'm quite happy to take advice as to whether it should be an annual review, or whether it should be once per council, or what we should do. But I do think we need to keep it under close scrutiny in case things change. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Jane. On that particular last point, I think in particular, which is recommendation 2, a timeline? Has anybody got any particular view in regards to that? I'll come to you first, Jamie. See, Archie, you come in after Jamie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We have always done this on the basis of the Town Centre Living Fund being an annual allocation, and within that, it's offered an opportunity to carry out the review on an annual basis as well, and potentially make different recommendations to members to allow them to consider and hopefully agree with officers' recommendations. I would intend that there's going to be a need to, or I'd imagine there's going to be a need to continue with an annual submission of a report on the Town Centre Living Fund and the budget allocation, and more than comfortable with us being able to carry out a review as part of that process. But we'll certainly take direction from members on that. In terms of the point around the budget that is received for this purpose, it's council tax on second homes and long-term empty properties. More than happy to also advise members on the budget that's received. Again, that would very much need to be on an annual basis because it is subject to fluctuations depending on the number of second homes, long-term empty properties, collection rates, etc. But more than happy to take members' direction on the review.
Come back to you first, Jane, and I think Archie's maybe want to make comment. See if you're happy. I did look recommendation 1. I just wondered, would the Town Centre Living Fund, in brackets, a financial figure, continues to operate in its current format? Is it as simple as that, or do you want something different, Jane?
No, I think that's exactly the sort of thing that we should just have, an indicative figure, circa such and such an amount of money.
Right, thank you. And it sounds like it's been appraised on an annual basis anyways. Are you content with that? Then I'll bring Archie in.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Chair, it does get appraised on an annual basis, and it also get potentially twice on an annual basis. 2 opportunities for members to make their decisions moving forward. I'm quite happy with the annual one, and it comes to E&R committee. And you know, with regards how much it actually is, as Jamie said, it'll be circa a certain amount because it fluctuates, as he says, and obviously sometimes people will move into the area full time and it won't be a second home anymore.
Thank you. Thanks for that addition, Archie. Jane, you're happy enough with that? Just my reading of it, Jamie, it's simple. It maybe does make sense, but it is the council should. So it's recommendation 3. The council should continue to support approaches that attract private sector investment too. I just, when I read it, it was reading into me, investment in unutilised properties. It's maybe just me the way I'm reading it. Should that 2 be in, or is it fine the way it is? Willie?
Yeah, just on, and if I didn't make it explicit, I too want to thank Jimmy for all his support. And he does give in housing. He's an exceptional officer in terms of the advice he gives. But just in recommendation 2, regular review, I would hope that we do a review, but adding to that we take into consideration the derelict building situation. I say this because in recommendation 3, if I'm reading the local papers correctly, there would appear to be an MSP who's going forward on maybe a private member's bill, just taking into consideration derelict property. So there may be some tie-in with that in terms of how far that has got, and whether it's pursuing to become an act or at least legislation on it, and funding being made available. So I think when it says pursue as much avenue as possible, I think we should be looking at that too, in terms of what the Scottish Government is going to provide to bring back derelict properties and to add to the living fund, the Town Centre Living Fund.
So I'm looking at these 3 recommendations. I think these will go to full council. So maybe let you come back on it. So we'll be putting these to full council, and it is talking about that. So in regards to the detail of that, Jamie, obviously you're the report author here, and the comments that Wally's just made there, how would that fit in with the recommendations that are contained here?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Scobie. In terms of the recommendation 3 around the support and approaches to attract private sector investment to unutilised properties, I think that what we're trying to allude to there is that through things like the development of the vacant and derelict land and property strategy, it's making sure the council has that enabling role to try and make these properties attractive to people to come in and invest, spend some money and bring them back into use. Recognising that the council tax on second homes and long-term empty properties is limited to simply affordable housing and can't be utilised in general market housing projects. There are other avenues that the council can take to try and bring these properties back into use. In terms of the Scottish Government funding, I think that what's really important as a council that we are actively doing is around the development of the vacant and derelict land and property strategy, which will help us to utilise any funding that is available on a national basis, such as the vacant and derelict land investment programme. But as a council where we do have a bit more discretion on the decisions that are being made, we have seen the place-based investment programme also being utilised to try and bring derelict sites back into use. So I think that what the intention of the strategy is to bring a really joined-up approach to that and maximise the benefits for the region, but also support that inward investment from whatever source that happens to be.
Okay, thank you for that, Jamie. Well, he's seen he's content with that. So when it comes to the three recommendations that we do, John, you come in first. I think I'll make sure that's right. Jane, you've spoke already, John. Yep.
Thanks, Chair. Just making a small point of clarification. The phrase long-term empty properties has been used quite a lot. The Town Centre Living Fund is only for long-term empty homes. Other commercial properties are not included in that. So I wanted to make that clarification. And also, I wondered if the council had any ability to raise more monies from second homes, or are we maxed out at the moment?
Please come in, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of the income that's generated by the council that's utilised for the Town Centre Living Fund, that is only generated from second homes and long-term empty homes. But we do utilise the Town Centre Living Fund to bring back into use long-term empty properties. Often some of the properties that are listed as commercial would readily be turned back into housing. So the funding does only come from the homes, but we are then utilising it in some circumstances towards bringing back those long-term empty properties. There are differences there around the non-domestic rates and the commercial sector that we try and overcome through the utilisation of the fund. So hopefully that clarifies that point there. Apologies, Councillor Young. Would you mind repeating your second question?
Thanks, Jamie. That's a very full, comprehensive answer. I appreciate it. My second point was, are we achieving the maximum income that it's possible to achieve from second homes and empty domestic properties at the moment?
Apologies, Councillor Young. Yes, I mean, I think as a council we've taken a couple of decisions through the council tax setting process for these types of properties that's meant that effectively the source of income is maximised as much as it could. I think one of the factors is with the income that's generated is that successful delivery of the work we're trying to do would actually reduce the income because we'd be reducing the number of long-term empty properties and the second homes as well. So yeah, as a council, the decisions that have been taken are maximising the income that's generated without going to the point of additional second homes and long-term empty homes being created.
Thank you, Jamie. John, you're probably okay with that, are you? Happy with that, Chair. Thanks very much, Councillor Young. So I think with the questions that have been asked, and the answers that have been given, it sounds to me like the committee is content with the three recommendations that are in front of us, the way they are, with the clarity that we've had. No, Katie, Councillor Hagman. Oh no, sorry, Apologies. I thought I misread that, yeah. You need to step out of the meeting. That's absolutely fine, Katie. So, but it sounds to me like the three recommendations as written down on page 8 are fit for purpose when it comes to going to full council on 31st of March. With the questions that have been asked, the points of clarity, Archie saying agreed, with members in the committee nodding. It's just me, I think, at this moment in time, but anyways, it seems like it's okay. So we have considered 2.1, we've considered 2.2 and 2.3, if we can agree to submit this to the full council 31st of March. Thank you, thanks very much. We'll move on to a scrutiny handbook now, which is item number 6. And Fraser, thanks very much, Jamie. And as everybody else has said, well done for all the good work there. Thank you. Fraser, it's over to you now.
Well, thank you, Chair. Obviously, members have in front of them the proposed refreshed handbook. It's ultimately aiming to provide just a wee bit of additional support to members to enable you to kind of make effective decisions in selecting topics. There's some updated guidance throughout. It's broadly reflective of how Scrutiny has operated in recent years anyway, but I'm happy to take any questions at all or if any kind of further clarity is required.
Thank you, Fraser. I'm just looking to see if there's any speakers coming up, which Councillor Maitland. Jean, I'll let you in first.
Right, sorry, I thought it was actually Archie. It was just a very small point, actually, Fraser, which is in the first section of the book, we seem to have got, I think, a typo, something about, where is it? Scrutiny error, bookmark not defined. I'm not absolutely certain about what that's saying, or what that actually means, whether I'm going to be faced with something which I didn't totally expect, or what it is.
No. I've noticed that, Councillor Maitland, and it will be resolved after this committee. It's just an issue with the table of contents page itself.
Sounds good to me. I appreciate the fact that we are looking for data and evidence. I think that being made explicit, I think is helpful, so that members are focused on saying, well, what do we have which actually backs up what we're being told. So thank you for that. I've got no other comments, Chairman, with respect to this.
Thanks for that, Jane. Apologies, Archie. I'd seen the agreed. I didn't see the speaker underneath it, but I think you're coming in next, Archie.
That's fine, Chair. Always happy to stand aside for Jane. I just wanted to say it's a good piece of work. This, I think we've done pretty well as audit, scrutiny, and committee over the last number of years. And there isn't a lot of difference, but updated in legislation. So just to say thanks to Fraser for the work that he's done on this, and I'm happy with the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Archie. Jane, you want to come back in? One more point, I think I said.
I am, Chairman. Yes, absolutely. This was with respect to the issue on page 27 about asking political groups for their opinion, the selection process. And I actually thought it was probably more appropriate to say all members, and then the groups can maybe decide amongst themselves. But it is just conceivable. I can see it being conceivable because it's happened in past councils that you get members who are actually not in groups. And I don't think that they should be debarred from bringing proposals for scrutiny. So I just think maybe it should simply say all members, be circulated to all members to identify a short list of reviews. I don't know what other members feel about that.
I personally think that's a good point, Fraser. I hadn't thought, because we actually have one at this moment in time, don't we? So, Fraser, your thoughts?
I would agree. I would agree with that. It was written to be inclusive of, shall we say, independent members. They would obviously receive that as alongside the groups at that stage to shortlist. So it wasn't aimed to exclude them at all from the process. They were always going to be involved here. Also, the process would be that all members are asked to suggest topics for a long list, and then they'd be shortlisted by groups. But obviously, the independents, being independent, are not in a group as such, so they would have a chance there again to shortlist the full list of received proposals.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Fraser. One small point of clarity for myself. So the way we worked previously is, well, certainly over the last 4.5 years, is that we undertake a scrutiny review. It's like a 3-stage process. The first one is about gathering the initial information, what we need. Second one is about going through that, scrutinise it completely, as in a workshop anyway. So we'll meet the committee, we have a workshop, we bottom out exactly what we want to achieve from that. The second one, we workshop, we're looking at, we just build on that, get to a close to the point of final outcome, and we're absolutely clear on the third one. Okay, this is it, it's finished, and it's almost like a 2 to 3 committee cycle at the moment. When I was reading this, it looks to me like it does fit in with that, because you talk about two either committees or workshops in particular, just to get some kind of assurance in that, because I think scrutiny reviews need to be clear, concise, precise, and time limited.
Yes, so obviously I'd be proposing a minimum of 2 workshops. The first workshop's obviously for members to be presented with the relevant information for the scrutiny review, kind of to gather their initial thoughts. The second, or potentially third, depending on the subject, is really a chance for members to kind of reflect and for the recommendations and findings to be bottomed out, as it were. So that would be the proposal. That's kind of it's a continuation of the way the committee has been working.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Cheers, Fraser. Stephen, then Willie. Stephen's first, then Willie.
Thanks, Chair. Just on page 39, it's got the appendix on site visit protocol. I'm just wondering, in terms of belt and braces, do we need to sort of COVID-proof that? Because obviously it's not as straightforward, maybe having site visits these days. And I don't know for how long into the future, so maybe it's, do we need to make mention of that the appropriate health and safety measures have been taken, etc., just to make it explicit, or is that overkill? Thank you.
Fraser?
I'm more than happy to add that. I'd say it would just be a small bullet point regarding the appropriate health and safety measures. So no, more than happy to add a point regarding that to the site visit protocol.
So risk assessment in real terms, Stephen. Okay, Councillor Thompson. Willie?
Yeah, Chair, just to clarify, if I picked you up correctly, you're referring there to workshops and that they've got a specific purpose and they've got an outcome and a timeline. I would see that the same for seminars, that the primary concern is that it's still committees who take decisions, still members that take decisions, that workshops should not be used, or indeed seminars be used. And there may be some scrutiny needed around that, where seminars are perhaps being used to direct the council when it's decisions that need taken at committees. So I'm just wondering if I've picked you up correctly. And just on corporate governance, and I well remember the discussion we had some years ago, just on the 48-hour rule, where decisions are made, but they're not implemented on the 48-hour rule, and we looked at other authorities who work, that a decision is made and then it goes to another committee. I think it was Audit and Risk of other committees to see whether it has any risk to that decision that is taken, whether we've actually reviewed other means of operating out with the 48-hour rule, or a different way of doing things in terms of corporate governance.
My understanding we do. The 48-hour rule applies to most committees, but not all. Quasi-judicial in particular, it doesn't. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Claire, because I know we've had this conversation in the past, but there is a percentage of the council, which is, I think, 25%, I think, you can recall. I mean, once it's been to full council meeting, I think that's it. It's full, final, finished, unless for some reason the Morton officer says, like, okay, this is an unsafe decision, you cannot take this, and they have that right, they have that legal right through the 73 Act, I think, wherever it is. do that. So I think that's the case. Well, and it comes to historically, I've had experience where I've been in scrutiny reviews for 18 months, and that's where I'm coming from. Nothing about the decision-making process, because I think we'll work well. Archie's touched on that. I do think we have a good, comes to workshops, everyone involved who gets a say, and that's it, is about come to an outcome. When we head towards full councils, we can see that clear decision, and that's where we hold people accountable. I think as Stephen's mentioned earlier. But when you sit on a scrutiny review for 18 months, which should have took 3 or 4 months, that's the point I'm coming to. Let's know, and if it's taken that long, there's something wrong. And that's almost a third of a term of council. So it wasn't about trying to make decisions in workshops or seminars or anything like that at all. It was just about being clear, concise, precise, and that timeline right there. So right, okay. And if we have to go beyond that, which we have, I think on 1 or maybe 2, it was only for 1 more meetings because we needed that extra information, which is no different from what we've done in the previous item where it say, okay, because there's so much information now being put to committee, we'll have a further report back on the recommendations. But it's within the timelines. We meet her. That's all. That's the only bit I was coming through, Willie.
No, Chair, I was just asking in general, not specific to how long did the workshop take. It's that there is a purpose for the workshop. It's got a clear timeline with identified outcomes, and that's across the board. And that would be the same for seminars, so that we're not just using seminars as a means of circumventing or undermining the authority of any committee. In terms of decision making, and also I just make reference to other means, and I know we looked at an authority, it was one in the Borders or Borders Council, or one of them that operate not on the 48-hour rule, but you can call in a report where it is considered that it may be unsafe, the decision, but as you point, it would be the responsibility of the monitoring officer to determine or to look at decisions that are made. I'm not sure if you look at every decision that's made and against whether it's safe and there is any risk in it.
In terms of the first point, I absolutely agree. Decisions are made in committees and council, and the workshops are there to define the position as much as we can from members' expressions and their points being raised within those workshops, which allows officers to try and define it as much as we can, and where we need further clarity, as we've had an example today, then we obviously have to go back and get that further clarity from members. Ultimately, it's just this committee that will take that decision, and will recommend thereafter. In terms of you'll be aware that we're carrying out the scheme of delegations review, and that's something that we can certainly take on board. We are carrying out comparisons and benchmarking with other local authorities, and that could be something that we specifically look at. So we can note that in terms of further consideration in terms of best practice that might be out there, and in terms of decision making. I'm happy to look at that again with a view to putting forward within the overall scheme of delegations review.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Same as other members, Fraser, I'm happy with this. I mean, when I first read it through, I did read it 2 or 3 times. I think it felt a bit like of a dilution from the previously scrutiny committee. Had its own felt its remit, its purpose, so on and so forth. But what we're saying here is, in real terms, well, let's cast this out to the whole council. So whether you're a single member, whether it's a political group, and whether it's the senior leadership team and officials, so on and so forth, if it's something relevant, just ping it to the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee to do a scrutiny review. But the reassurance I got, as reading through it, is ultimately there's a number of different formats or processes to which a scrutiny review could be suggested to the committee, but it does have the final consideration and decision on that. So that made me content. Initially I thought maybe it's diluting the strength and the purpose of the actual committee itself, but on reflection I thought, well, maybe not, and I apologise for not being as involved in this particular workshop as I maybe should have, but and just because of pressures I probably raised that at that point. So we're looking at the recommendations. 2.1 to consider the proposed updates and improvements to the Scrutiny Handbook referred to paragraph 3.5 and detailed within the appendix. I think we've done that. And 2.2 is to subject to members' consideration and comments at the meeting, agree to the refreshed Scrutiny Handbook as per appendix, which we will, and as James pointed out in the chat, it's in clear respect up. There is a slight admin point to be picked up on page 41, and Fraser has also alluded to that, and that will be changed. Thank you very much, which is move on to item number... Great, thank you. Thanks for that, Archie. Item number 7, which is internal audit reports issued. Report by Head of Governance and Assurance. It's Richard Fox and Kevin Garrity. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add to the report, but I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Kevin, just in case, I'm getting my papers together. Take it as an okay, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to open it up to members, which is, let me just double check. Archie, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I thought, first of all, the Leader annual report, I think, you know, we're coming to the end of Leader. There's a final sort of accumulation of what the projects have happened, in particular to that. I think it's appropriate to say that, you know, thanks to Leader programme, there's been a lot of good projects across the region in Dumfries and Galloway, which have benefited from the funds that have been put in there from the European side of things. I think with regards to the risk management programme on the support payments for strategic framework grants and discretionary grants, it highlights very well, I think, the difficult circumstances that members of staff were actually under when there were changes of guidelines and things like that, sometimes on a daily basis from the Scottish Government. But I think it picks up everything that we've said. I think it's appropriate, of course, that we have to thank those staff and say, you know, well done for getting that funding out there to the businesses and to the other organisations which required it. But I think three excellent internal audit reports and the recommendations are good, Chair.
Thank you for that, Archie. So we've been asked to note and comment. You've certainly made your comments here. Do you want to reflect on that? Richard, any comments to make before I go to it'll be Councillor Campbell next?
No, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Richard. It's Councillor Campbell, then Maitland. John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. And forgive me for my voice. I'm just getting over a chest infection. This is probably a kind of daft laddie question on page 38, where it says links to tax havens. And it mentions that, you know, that remains a small risk. But I was looking back at page 34 where it says recipients not being genuine, and it states here that the councils will not be held financially liable for overpayments, etc. I'm kind of wondering, what is that small risk, and would we still be held liable? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, John. Richard?
Thank you, Chair. I understand the distinction is between the grant conditions which come from the Scottish Government, and my apologies, I'm not actually a lawyer myself, but the Pacific Act of Parliament might actually have overriding liabilities on the council which are not covered by the grant things. So that's where the distinction comes in. So the Scottish Government will not hold us liable as a result of the grant conditions, but there could be an overriding Act of Parliament. Thank you.
So what is the small risk to the council?
Small risk with the council will be having to reimburse the Scottish Government, I would think.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that, John. Thank you, Richard. We have Councillor Maitland next, then Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chairman. Richard, if I could, it's 4.12, and there's a sample there of 7 items, I think, if I'm reading that rightly, and there seems to be a couple of errors. Do you think that that's a reasonable number of errors? Were you surprised at that level of error in there? And it does strike me, with respect to the redeployment pool for a member of staff, that really was not the right thing to do. So I wonder if you would comment a little further on 4.12, please.
What page is 4.12, Jane, before Richard answers?
29, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chair, it relates to the Leader report. That's Appendix 1 that Councillor Maitland's referring to.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So, thank you, Chair. Certainly, in terms of the leader project, it is unusual to have admin errors at this late stage, and certainly the project was in the process of winding down with the key member of admin staff moving on to other things by the time this claim was made. But like yourself, I am disappointed to have found that there was an overpayment, an overclaim of 1 month's salaries from the Scottish Government, and also that I was unable to reconcile the overtime payments. So there's no message going forward, but yes, it is disappointing that there was a couple of errors there.
Chairman, if I might, I mean, does that lead us to think about anything else, if you see what I mean? Is that a kind of amber warning? And if so, what should we be looking for? Or is it something that just happens occasionally and is then put right, or that you were not able to agree the overtime payments? And how significant were those overtime payments?
The level of overtime payments we're looking at, the difference is a matter of a few £100s, not any larger amount. The claim drawdown request 67 had in the region of several thousand lines of expenditure which were put into LARGs, of which I've identified that says one salary payment was done correctly. In terms of this project going forward, the project is now ended, with the staff either leaving the council or moving on to other things within the council. I'm not sure what lessons there are to be learned from this. Thank you.
Jean, I'll give you a chance to come back in if you want to, otherwise we'll move on to Councillor.
No, I think, Chairman, I just thought there were quite a lot of errors, if you see what I mean, in quite a small sample. But maybe I'm not right there. And the other thing, I do want to say that the grant system, was a complete nightmare to administer. I can see that, and I think actually that the council did very well. So I would like to send my congratulations to everyone involved there. I think it was incredibly difficult to do, and I think they did very well.
Thank you, thanks very much. My experience with leader through my constituents, I may say, is it's like getting blood out of a stone, and there's a lot of due diligence goes on there. But we'll leave that on the side. So, John, on the speaker, it looks like you're next, but actually, so Councillor Scobie caught my eye in the room, so that's the why it is that way. So it's Councillor Scobie next, then by the time it was written in, you're up there. So it's Councillor Scobie, then Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at leader report as well, and whether indeed it is audit, risk and scrutiny that looks at this, but I never got a sense of what has to happen when withdrawal from EU through Brexit, and whether this will be the projects then will be taken care of through the internal market arrangements through the UK government. So I'm not sure if that was actually a focus, and if there are projects out there that are at risk of just falling off the end with no indication of where to go or how to continue. My next question would be on page 31 to do with the programme COVID support payments, and under 1.3 self-catering properties, B&Bs, guest houses, campsites, caravan parks and so forth and so on. And then in the following page it talks about 2,239. I just wonder if we actually, in the review, if we managed to identify the actual number who would be eligible for this, and whether, as it says in 1.4, we were in total control, because there was a lot of confusion between the council and South of Scotland Enterprise on applying for grants and cut-off dates and whether they were eligible or not. I just wonder if the review actually looked at that and whether we did maximise the payments to people who suffered under COVID in the hospitality sector.
Thank you, Chair. Can I answer Councillor Scobie's question about leader on first?
Yep, please.
As part of the grants application, each of the grant applicants was required to demonstrate that the project will be sustainable after the leader funding had come to an end. So that's been addressed. As for future, whether there are future projects that will come out of that would have benefited from leader funding had the project continued, I'm not sure where the Scottish Government and Westminster approach to this funding is. Although there's obviously discretion within the council itself to award funding through other grant schemes to support relevant third sector bodies, if that would help.
It gives us an indication of where to look, but I'm not sure if it actually helps, because if we have got risk out there of people's employment coming to an end because, I think we need to clarify or seek clarification in respect of what has been referred to as the internal market and monies being made available now that we are not contributing to the EU. Whether these projects would be entitled to then seek funding from the internal market, if that is the correct source, because the region, Dumfries and Galloway, could run a risk of people being made maybe not redundant, but become unemployed because there is no longer any funding coming from EU or leader programme. But it might be a step in for the internal market if that is the correct source. If we could just find that out, Chair.
Just before you do come in, Richard, my understanding is these internal audit reports, stroke reviews, it's as much about compliance, the due diligence, it's as much about that as it is about the sustainability of an applicant going forward. But I mean, Richard, it's for you really to answer that point.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, this is one of those areas where I have a vague knowledge, but I would suggest that the committee, if you would like an answer to this, would need to invite another officer with a more detailed knowledge of external funding opportunities to come and speak to them. Thank you.
I take the point you made, Chair, and it may be something that we put to ERC in terms of the potential risk of people becoming unemployed because EU is going to run out under leader, and maybe direct it that way if that's appropriate.
Thanks for that. Well, we've got a number of opportunities in which to do that. It looks like Archie's wanting to come in at that particular same point. Archie?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I was actually on the Leader Action Group, and by the end of September this year, the fund will be closed. All projects were well aware of the closing date, and they have put their final applications forward, and I believe that everything has been completely finished with regards Leader and the process that they actually go through. The council was the accountable body for Leader, and that's been sorted out with. No, I don't believe there's any risk to the council now because the closure of it's actually happening. I believe to replace that, if I can maybe hopefully answer Councillor Scobie's question, is there was supposed to be a rural grant scheme coming from the UK government, but I'm not sure exactly where that actually is, and that was to replace things like Leader. There is place-based schemes from the Borderlands project and things like that as well, which may help. And there has been discussions between the ENR director and the what was formerly called the LAG about how we take anything forward, but nothing's come forward for that yet.
Thank you. So, apologies for this, John. So, Councillor Young, that is. So, see what you've noted in the chat, Malcolm. So, but Kevin, I think you want to come in on the same point, and then we'll move on to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was really to try and assist the committee by providing a sort of slightly broader context. So, Leader, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was what was called the ERDF funding, European Regional Development Funding, and the Dumfries and Galloway Council was one of a relatively small number of authorities that qualified for it, and the programme generally provided funding to projects. And these were therefore time defined. They often required co-funding and so on. And they allowed development of organisations and so on. So they were not for running costs. So in some senses, there should be no issue about people's vulnerability to loss of employment as a result of the drying up of the EU funds. Now, they represent an opportunity for development, which, isn't there anymore. But as Councillor Dryburgh says, the UK government has made various pronouncements about replacement funding. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the programme that they were talking about. But yes, places like Cornwall, for example, received significant funding through the EU for their region, and they're very keen indeed that some kind of funding continues for this sort of work. It helps the local economy, very much so. It strengthens organisations that are operating and so on. So it was very good stuff, and the region benefited very well. The administration of this generally was of a very high standard. It got better from the start of it. We've been receiving this money for 20 odd years through different phases. But, it was a very high standard at the conclusion. As Richard says, it's a bit disappointing. There was perhaps a bit of a slip in administration at the end. But it was not to do with the money that people were getting for their projects. It was to do with what we were capturing as having been spent and reporting that as the Scottish Government. The risk that the Council faces here is that the Scottish Government, who also in turn is accountable to UK government, who in turn is accountable to the EU for this money. It is possible that somebody in the Scottish government would say, nah, we're not paying you that. You haven't met the criteria, or you haven't submitted your expenses appropriately. It's very unlikely. And the even more remote possibility is that somebody from Europe trots along to do an audit. And those audits they do a programme audit, and they might visit Dumfries and Galloway in order to obtain confirmation of correct administration and following of EU rules. Our work over the years would contribute to assurance on that. They would probably come and quiz us about what we did and how we did it and this sort of stuff. And again, as I say, that's a fairly remote prospect, but it is still a possibility that somebody from Europe will come along and want to audit the programme. But overall, it's disappointing the programme's come to an end, because as a beneficiary, region has got some good things out of this programme. And as I say, in the main, and certainly for a long period, it was very well and very tightly administered. It was a good outcome. So we're all waiting, I think, to see what the UK government's proposals are and how they'll work through to Scotland for replacement funding, because undertakings were given by the UK government as part of the European exit process that these funds would be, or similar, would be produced. So, but as I say, there's announcements yet to be received about that. So I'm sorry if that sounds political. It's not meant to be. It was a general overview, Chair. So I hope that's helpful to the committee for context.
It is. Full and final answer. Didn't feel political at all, Kevin. So, Councillor Young, you're next. John.
Thanks, Chair. It seems a long time since I requested to speak, and much of what I wanted to say has been covered. I remain discontent at item 4.12, and okay, a little bit of a administration error towards the end. But if you look at near the bottom of that page, does any further action need to be taken? A full financial reconciliation between Leader and the General Ledger should be completed. Now, from what's been said by other speakers, that's never going to happen. And I think we should note our disappointment at this little bit of administration slip towards the end. I don't think we as Audit, Risk and Scrutiny can just accept this and move on. I would like some sort of indication from this committee that we're dissatisfied with this final little slip. That's my first point. My second point is on page 45. I mean, obviously, the council did a tremendous job handing out grants, but if I look at the very top of Appendix 3 on page 45, we noted 3 grants in our sample were awarded to businesses which had the same owners as another business and shared premises with them. So that was 4 businesses all sharing the same address. Now, obviously, I'm not going to pick up on that and ask for a reinvestigation. All I want to know is, how big was the sample? What percentage of businesses who were given grants formed part of the sample? So that's the 2 points I was waiting to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think it's by Richard, is it?
Thank you, Chair. In response to the Leader, that's for the committee to note. My sample size for discretionary grants was a sample of 50 of the grants, if that helps, Chair.
John, does that help?
Not really. 50 out of 60 would be tremendous. 50 out of 2,000 would be a very small sample. What percentage of the businesses awarded grants were sampled?
Do you have them figures to hand, Richard?
It is 50 grants out of the total number that was awarded of, is it 1,700? 630 grants were awarded. So 50 out of 630, 1 in 12.
And out of that 50, 4 grants were awarded to the same address.
That's correct, yes. There were the key purpose of the discretionary grants was to award discretionary funding to those businesses which were suffering financial hardship as a result of being adversely affected by the COVID regulations in place. So
that seems quite incredible that 4 out of the 50 were to the same address. Now, if you extrapolate upwards to your 630, so that would be 14 times 4. That would be almost 50 grants to the same address. I know that's an impossible situation, but it just seems a rather strange statistic to me. Thank you, Chair. And I would like my first point noted as well.
Chair, may I come in, sorry, on the Leader point, the first point that Councillor Young makes. Yes, I think, it is, as we've discussed, disappointing. In terms of the reconciliation, we were looking for a full and proper accounting reconciliation. As you say, the likelihood of that occurring now is small, but what we have got is all of the expenditure and income relating to Leader were kept in the same pocket, the same area of accounting. And in fact, it appears to be the case that we struggle a bit to understand how come, but it looks as if the current claims submitted to the Scottish Government, when paid, will leave the Council with a small surplus. And as I say, that surplus dates back 10 years, so we can't get a resolution and analysis of it. But the risk to the Council, any financial risk to the Council, is extremely small. We'd have preferred reconciliations done as we went along, but the end point, now that the programme has wrapped up, appears to leave the Council with a modest surplus across the account, extending back a number of years. So the risk is indeed very minor indeed. And so I'm sorry to sound a bit dismissive, Councillor Young, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is it worked very well in some ways, due to good diligence and effort by officers. If we didn't have the confidence at the time, we can have the confidence at the end of the process.
Thanks for that, Kevin. So I suppose, John, I'm just going to ask a question of, I suppose, our governance in regards to, so we're talking about your level of disappointment. This report is, so it's an audit report, it's facts in front of us, but our remit, our terms of reference, our powers and so on and so forth, I think maybe we could note the disappointment in this particular point, but I just wonder, when it comes to a remit to this committee, does it go beyond that? I don't know if that's what you look for, John, but it sounds like that you are. I'll take governance advice first, and then I'll come back to you, John, then we'll move on.
I think obviously the disappointment element of it will be recorded, and I'm just checking with Claire on that front, and I don't think there's you've got an answer now from the officer in terms of the internal audit position on it, and as long as members are satisfied, then what will be that recording of that disappointment.
Okay, thanks for that, Vlad. Now we take it that'll be in a minute, John. Are you content with that as we move on?
Happy to move on, Chair.
Thank you. No issue, John, by any means. I'm just trying to make sure that it's clear and concise, because I think it's a valid point that you've brought up, and if it's to be recorded, how do we do that factually so your points are made? Yes, but what about the second, says Councillor Maitland. You're next, obviously, Jane, but I just wondered if we could, any further points in regards to that. Just come and tell us exactly what you mean by that, Jane, please.
Chairman, Councillor Young raised the point about the payments to the same addresses, and I think he's right actually. It does seem to me, I'm not absolutely certain whether the issue would have been corrected and whether it would have been noticed. I absolutely agree that the discretionary fund was to relieve distress, really, and to rescue people from feeling absolutely bereft. But at the same stage, would it have been picked up at all? And is Councillor Young correct in saying that perhaps we should think carefully about, if this was to happen again, how would we avoid that particular set of errors?
No, thank you. So I'm going to come back to John on this point. Kevin, I'm not going to let you in just because, and we're on a 10-minute countdown, Jane, for you to take over, just to make you aware. I will be leaving here at 12. But I'm just trying to get a clear understanding of, from John's point of view, the powers and remit. So I don't know if we're saying we're disappointed in regards to the 4 payments going to the same individual premise. Does that mean we think that there might be fraudulent or corrupt behaviour there has been going on? I think we need to be absolutely clear on what we're saying here, because if there's not an issue and it's met the criteria and there's 4 businesses operating from the same premise, the same address, then to me it sounds quite legitimate. But ultimately, I haven't got that level of detail.
Chair, can I come in on that?
Go on, Archie, then we'll get clarity in regards to this.
The discretionary payment may have been perhaps with the single address. The individual owner may be an owner of, for instance, 4 hotels, and the address for the administration may be the home address. I mean, we were getting regular updates on a Monday how many grants were being paid, but it may have been one address, but it may have been 4 different individual hotels, for instance, or bed and breakfast, or whatever. The administration was done by the same address. That was the only reason that I would suggest that there would be 4 addresses the same than anything else.
So I suppose that's where I'm coming from, actually. I came across that myself, and it's assumptions maybe getting made here. I'll come back to you, John, just so, because I think it's your 2 points, but Jane's coming in and saying, like, OK, what about your second point as well? If you're comfortable, John, I'll be comfortable in moving forward, but we do note a disappointment, in particular around about leader. If you want to add to that, with your second point, that's up to you. And then ideally, we'll just move on from there. John, back to you.
No, my second point, Chair, I'm not indicating in any way a dubious practice. It's just a statistical anomaly that out of a sample size of 50, 4 of them go to a single address. In other words, 8% of the sample went to a single address. It just seems statistically strange as a former maths teacher. Thanks very much, Chair.
Yep, I would agree with that. So I don't know if it's something that, to satisfy John's curiosity, that information could be given on a wider scale, but I mean, John, I'd be quite content for you to take that out with, and if you had any concerns, bring it back to us in regards to that, because it can raise an eyebrow, but ultimately it's probably quite innocent. So I'm not going to let Kevin or Richard in. I think we've got to the point, unless you're absolutely... There's pieces. So if there's any other members got any other points they wish to raise in regards to the... Right, come on, well, the last point then we'll move on and give it share, because he has been insistent.
Well, that's the second question, but there wasn't the answer. That was on self-catering. And again, my question was, did Scrutiny pick up on the confusion or any confusion between the Council and South of Scotland Enterprise, who had both had the authority to disperse of the payments, and whether that had an effect on the eligibility? And looking at 2,200 now, I would imagine there are a lot more bed and breakfast, self-catering and so forth that's identified in 1.3.
Richard or Kevin, can either of you answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it briefly. Yes, it was a challenging programme. We've noted in our audit report that effectively there were 141 pieces of guidance around the Strategic Framework Grants Programme issued to local authorities. It was a scheme that shifted and developed. There was, I think, an element of confusion, should we say, and even perhaps a tiny bit of overlap. But at the end of the day, it was a tough programme to administer, but we weren't finding any serious problems. Some hiccups along the way, but we weren't finding any serious hiccups along this one. I compare strategic frameworks with discretionary. Strategic framework grants really sorry, I nearly said a bad word there, I apologise, was governed by the Scottish Government, who did receive representations from local authorities, which is why the scheme adapted and changed. Discretionary, it was very much more about the local authority making a decision within a framework about how to progress things. So yes, there probably was at the time confusion between various parties about who was responsible for what and where the support could come from. Across the piece, it was a major exercise. Businesses were well supported in the region, and I think have contributed to sustenance of the economy. And so overall, I think it was a good outcome, a good result, as many members have recognised.
Thanks, Kevin. Well done, Willie.
No, I just want to thank Kevin for his response, but I may not agree with his analysis. And this was an issue that was at full council, I don't know how many times, in terms of people who were being shunted from one to the other. So there was a great deal of confusion, and it's really just to feed that back to the Scottish Government, because we're not out of COVID yet. We don't know what's going to happen from today, as was said earlier.
Thank you, Willie, for being insistent on your second point. So we've been asked at recommendation 2 to note and comment on the finalised audit reports as per appendices 1 to 3. We've certainly done that. I don't see any further names coming in, and we have picked up on your point through the minute. I think, Claire, is what we're saying. That Councillor Young's point is that we do note our disappointment in regards to the leader programme. So if we can see that in the minute, I think we've satisfied recommendation 2. We'll move on to item number 8, which is the follow-up of internal audit reports considered by the committee in April and June this year. Report to Head of Governance. And Kevin, it's saying it's you that I'll lead on this. What about you, Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a standing report from members. We follow up internal audit reports after 6 months. 3 fall within the scope of that requirement. 1 on housing benefits and council tax reduction. 1 on council tax, which had 2 parts to it. So we've actually accelerated the report back on the second part of it. And the third one was the purchase to pay scheme. That was an ambitious project, should we say, or the ambition behind the project is significant to the council. I'm happy to take questions, Chair. There are also members, representatives from the services involved available if there are specific questions you want to ask about management's response. But we're recommending all 3 be closed because we think sufficient work and progress has been made to be able to close the reports for further follow-up work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Archie, someone just come in saying agree. What are you agreeing to, Archie?
I'm agreeing to close the reports, Chair. There was sufficient movement made on all 3 reports to close them down.
Okay. Councillor Maitland's wanting to speak, and we'll cover that, Archie, as we go through. I don't think this will take too long. Councillor Maitland, Jane? Jane, you're good to come in. If you...
My machine is being just desperately slow at the moment, I'm afraid. What I was going to ask about is in Appendix 2, which is the single person discounts issue. And I understand that it is going to be outsourced to Northgate. Now, some members might remember we had a frightful carry-on when this work was outsourced the last time round, and I suppose I'm really just hoping that in the midst of this follow-up report we are taking account of what happened last time and not making the same mistake, because we actually had to go out, I think, and redo the whole thing. So I hope that will be a lesson learned at that point. That's with respect to Appendix 2. And in Appendix 3, I'm sort of curious to know about the challenge to services in respect of retrospective orders. it doesn't actually say how many there are and what sort of level of difficulty we have with retrospective orders. And maybe somebody could explain to me what the real significance of this is. How would we know whether there is improvement happening with respect to the number of retrospective orders? So there are a couple of questions, Appendix 2, Appendix 3. I'm quite happy to take over from you, Chairman, if that's what you want to do.
Thank you. We'll see. We'll get on with this one. About 20 past. I'll leave it in your capable hands, Jane, at that point, and wish everybody a Merry Christmas then.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make first comment. Colleague Helen Drinkwater is here in respect to the council tax report. This is perhaps a personal observation, which is a bit cheeky, but we have nagged our colleagues in council tax over an extended period of time about SPDs, which probably going back 15 years or so, as a council, like many other councils, we were quite complacent about. It was quite clear that there were issues around SPD. So I have to say, in support of my colleagues, that previously, perhaps Helen could give a bit more detail on but we were being very challenging on the SPD award. It can represent, it can represent a significant reduction in council tax collection, and if it's not appropriate, then people shouldn't be allowed to get away with it, so to speak. So we demand honesty and happy to award SPD when it's eligible, but it was clear that a number of people were claiming SPD who were not eligible. So we have been challenging and quite robust, and in fact, in some ways, we led the way a bit, because I know the exercise you were talking about, other local authorities followed suit to our approach to things, which has cleaned up this area significantly. So, as the audit reporter on this, I would say, what we're reporting in the original reports was that an SPD exercise needs to be progressed, and the approach by the service is to seek to exercise that. I'm quite confident that will be appropriately managed, but perhaps I'll hand over to Helen at this point.
Just before you hand over to Helen, just get a wee second. I will leave at this part. I didn't realise it was just as late on. I've been tracking the time as well as what I thought it was. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. Wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I'll leave. Obviously, you will stay. Jane, I don't know if you see it, Councillor Thompson's after you. He's next to speak. But thanks, everybody, and we'll catch you in the new year.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And on we go. And Helen, Ms. Drinkwater, thank you very much indeed. Are you going to come in and tell us about it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we are doing another single person discount review. I'm currently working on a briefing paper that is actually going to be sent to all members, just explaining what the process will be, and that hopefully you should receive in the next few weeks. So I'm hoping if any member has any concerns, the briefing paper will alleviate that. Thank you.
Perfect. That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed. Kevin, the next question that I had with respect to retrospective orders, who's going to deal with that one?
Yes, Chair. Our colleague Lindsay Wilson will talk about that. Again, it may have been the case that when we did the audit, the new system was in place and people were sort of in transition. I would say probably, we were reporting that the level of retrospective orders was high, relative to what we wanted to see if the system was to achieve its objectives. So that's why we tagged it, though, was saying keep the challenge up and make sure that that doesn't become the de facto state. But my colleague Lindsay will comment on that.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Chair. Yes, we're Finance and Procurement are taking retrospective orders very seriously. The issue really is that a retrospective order is of concern because it can theoretically manoeuvre around the sort of procurement regulations. So we have to be very, very careful that doesn't happen. Following from the audit, we appointed the senior members of our RSS team who would deal with sort of orders to examine the sort of numbers of retrospective orders that services were raising. And we're continually to monitor. It's one of these things that, although we've marked up as completed, complete in the sense we've actually put in a process, but it's one of these things that we will continually monitor just to make sure that it's not being abused and You'll also see from the response there, from discussions with managers within finance and procurement, we're going to set up a sort of financial transaction service officer group with the idea basically liaising with the various departments and services and sort of pulling them up if we feel that the number of retrospective orders is getting too high. At the same time, we closely liaise with our colleagues in procurement to ensure that any of these retrospective orders that we are concerned about get further sort of examination to make sure that, as you say, the procurement process isn't being exploited in any way. So yes, we've now introduced we think a detailed process to look at retrospective orders, but it's something that we will continue to ensure and keep our eye on as time goes by. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Thompson, I think you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. It's actually on the first appendix to do with council tax overpayment debt. So in one of the actions or sort of planned work by management, it says there's a planned tidy up, in quotes, to old housing benefit. And I just sort of wondered, is there a sense of what that amounts to? It does mention the £1.6 million in the narrative of the report on the previous page. So I was just wanting to get a sense of how much of it are we talking about, and that tidy up, obviously that's planned work. I take it, are we sufficiently assured that that work will actually get carried out in a reasonable time frame? And just by way of a note as well, on the first page it says the council has around 1.6 million hosing benefit, so it's just really a wee typo there that obviously could be misread amusingly. So it's just really on those points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Thank you. Far ahead.
Chair, just to say, yes, one of the kind of points we were trying to make, perhaps subtly, in our report around housing benefit and council tax reduction was the challenge represented by recovering overpaid housing benefit. You know, we were kind of making the point that, yes, it's debt that's owed and needs to be recovered, and you can't ignore it. But equally, we have an anti-poverty strategy, and it is the case that those in most difficult circumstances can find it very challenging indeed to repay overpaid housing benefits. So that's why this is a bit of an area that's kind of, it's not easy to tackle. It's not as straightforward as council tax debt. It's more complicated. So there are some challenges for the service in delivering that. But I'll introduce my colleague Paula Doherty, who can perhaps comment further on this point.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Yes, the challenge of recovering a housing benefit debt never leaves us. I think what we're working on at the moment is helpfully in the report termed a tidy up, because that's in essence what it is. We're looking at housing benefit debt that is outstanding and has been outstanding on our systems for some time, and taking a final stab at recovery. And if it isn't appropriate or able to be recovered, then it will be tidied up. So we'll cease taking further action on that debt position. As Kevin mentioned, many of these customers who have been overpaid housing benefit are not exactly sitting awash with funds. And if we were to take serious action on recovery, we would put them into crisis.
Thank you. Is it okay to come back quickly, Chair?
Yep.
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, so no, I fully appreciate that this is maybe some of the most sort of difficult areas in terms of debt recovery, and fully appreciate that. So it was really, obviously I'd imagine there'll be assessments made and quite a lot of debt will be written off. I think just in terms of the 1.6 million outstanding, I just wanted to get a sense of how much of that would be likely in the tidy up, because clearly if it's more beneficial to people to write it off, then it's just to get a sense of how much that would be. Thank you.
I'm just looking that up, if that's okay. If I can share it with members after the end of the meeting. The value of outstanding debt we have in total is about 1.6 million. I just don't have the numbers open at this time, so can I share that with members after?
That's fine with me, Chair.
Yes, of course, Paula, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed. And we understand.
Could I come in there, Chair, just to say as well, just in terms of any sort of write-offs for housing benefit debt, we do report this through the Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee. Paula and our colleague Helen helped myself to pull together the report for those committee every 6 months. So for issues of transparency, we're very keen to actually show that to members and get their agreement to the write-offs. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you to officers, and Stephen, thank you for raising that issue. It will come back to us, and Paula will give us the information after the meeting. That's kind. Thank you. I don't have any other member who wants to speak. And going back to the recommendations, I'm getting the impression that members are very happy to note and comment 2.1 on the progress. And I don't get any sense that you want to re-include in a follow-up. Shout now if you do. And 2.3, we're noting that the service follow-up reports on social work direct payments and business continuity planning will be scheduled for February and March. And with that then, please, could members move on to item number 9, which is the risk management arrangements. I don't have the benefit of the Chair's notes, so I wonder who's going to take this, please. Probably Vlad, is it? Or Kevin?
Chair, this is my report, so I'm down to speak to it and answer questions in the first instance. So again, not to overstay my welcome, this is an annual report to the committee. It'll be the third one in succession where we've reported at this time of the year to set out for the committee's benefit, or to confirm to the committee's benefit, what our risk management arrangements are, and also what developments have taken place during the year. So those are mentioned throughout the report. For members' benefit, we've also included 2 appendices, the first of which is a listing, along with the assessment rating, of service business plan risks, which have just been reported, and I think maybe 1 or 2 still have to go to service committees in December, but it's pretty much, this is as fresh as it can be. Ink's still wet on this one. So it's a useful listing. I think it provides you with an overview of what the risks are at service business plan level. And then we have the corporate risk register, which is a change from the last time you saw it. You saw it in June, where it had 3 components to it. So they have been part of the work that's been done, has consolidated and reduced the number of risks. So I think we've got 11 corporate risks. And we also, the report explains the process that's involved in keeping those under review and, making sure that they are up to date and being managed appropriately. So the recommendation is for you to consider the effectiveness of the current risk management arrangements in providing reasonable assurance of effective and efficient operations. And also, we are suggesting that you look at 2 risks in the corporate risk register. This is by way of the committee's remit to assure the risk management process. So we're saying if you want to look at a couple of risks, 1 in February and 1 in March, we've made suggestions as to what they might be. And we'll bring officers to that meeting, have a paper on the agenda, and there can be a fairly full discussion if members wish about the approach to risk management that's been taken and what the components of the risk are and what mitigations are in place as well. So that's the other recommendation, is to say to members, do you agree to pick those risks? Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. And I'm glad to see that there is a little bit more resource being applied through 3.7. Archie, I think you want to speak.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And it's actually on the 2 potential risks coming forward for review at Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee, being the major capital projects and the climate change. I think actually the climate change will be a good one to bring forward, because there has been obviously COP26. There are issues around, whether we're doing the right thing with air source heat pumps. There's a whole range of different sort of research that is going on to make, to see if we could actually reach our climate target, which I think is a very difficult one, but it's a target all the same. And I think it's right that we've got a difficult target to reach, because then we're leading the way if we're trying to do it that quickly. I think it's appropriate that the major capital projects is also a risk, because we've seen major capital projects in the past which have not been properly governed and obviously managed in a way that has brought us some significant impacts as a council. So I think that the two suggestions are well made, and I would support them, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, certainly they appear in the risk register, the corporate risk register, as the highest ones, and the climate change one is outstandingly the highest one, that we might not reach our targets. So I'm totally in agreement with you, Councillor, that we should be tackling these two first. I think these are, yes, the two issues that we wanted to speak about. Does anybody else want to come in? The only thing I would say just at the moment is that, and I think Councillor Thompson might be here, but I'm just a bit curious on page 65 about the risk in social work, which has 4 very high risks. They're all deemed to be in the highest possible level. Failure to adapt practices in response to decreasing finances. And I'm a little curious about that. I think I need to explore that with the chair about the decreasing finances in social work. But I'm with you, Councillor, that we should go for these 2 top priorities. And I'm happy to propose that we agree the recommendations as they stand. I see there's somebody wanting to speak. Stephen, yes, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'd noticed basically the whole row effectively in Appendix 1 being ticked on high for social work, and particularly concerning, obviously, given it's obviously the most vulnerable citizens. So I think we're hearing a lot about how difficult it is to recruit and retain staff across a lot of the council's departments. So I think that's kind of well known. If not, that's no comfort, but I think we're aware of that across the whole piece. But in terms of the failure to adapt practices and also the failure of electronic information system, which I know how we share data and use data and manipulate that to deliver services, and also adapting, especially in light of the investment we've made to, I suppose, effectively transform how we do our early intervention, which is, I suppose, with the long-term intention of being changing work practices to some extent. So I think it's worthy of another look, but happy to put that in the queue of the priorities, if you like, if that's okay with yourself, Chair.
Well, of course, I'm in the hands of the committee. I see that Kevin wants to come in. Please come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yes, of course, the gimlet eye of members spots the one flaw in my listing. So you'll note that the date that these risks appertain to for social work is the 11th of May 21. So that's when these risks were last reported to the Service Committee. Unfortunately, their business plan risks were not able to be reported, I understand, to this round of committee. So my cutoff was December. So I put in May's risks. So that's the dates as of there, which may explain the reference to finances. We need to be cautious, Chair, without appearing to be lecturing. I'm sorry. These are provided for members' information for context. Of course, it's service committees that have the responsibility to review the service risks as reported. And again, I may be speaking out of turn. There is a difference, it's one of the interesting things, I think, in this listing. There is difference in perhaps the approach to risk management at service level. And I think it would be fair to say that probably social work are reporting their biggest issues. And that's why, to some extent, these are all ticked in this particular column of high. So in other words, they're reporting to committee what their big issues are. That's what's gone on here. Whereas some are more dynamic, that some risks are down in the low category for some services because perhaps they've moved there after a period of time. over a period of a year or so, sort of thing. So I think it's not, I think I very much welcome the Chair of Social Work's interest in his risk register for his service. This committee's role is effectively to observe that and note that. And I think if you've drawn it to his attention, that's a useful function for this committee as well. But it is the remit of the Service Committee to consider and scrutinise, if you like, the risks that are coming forward through service business plans. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Yeah, we certainly don't want to poach service business. No, you're quite right. I think at this, I don't know, I'm echoing. At this point, thank you very much. I think.
Sorry, Chair. Would it be okay to come in, Chair?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I absolutely was going to bring you in. Yep.
Thank you. It's just to add a bit of context as well to what Kevin has just said. Obviously, you've got your service risks that, rightly so, they should be further scrutinised within the relevant service committee, but also worthy of pointing out that the council-wide risks, which are the ones that we are lining up in what I would call the kind of deep dives, and we're proposing 2 deep dives for you in the forthcoming months. There are 2 other risks within that council-wide risk register, which includes significant service failure as well as delaying of demands, both of which I think are probably encompassed within the high risks that are highlighted there for social work. So in essence, when we have the deep dives on those 2 particular risks, would allow members to also put a bit of social work context into that at that point in time, but absolutely it's for that relevant service committee to thrash out and thereafter feed into that bigger and wider council-wide risk register.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. So what we've got to concentrate on is the corporate issue and to consider exactly what would happen if any of these risks happen to the whole of the what would be the situation and the impact upon the whole of the council's working. That's really what we're being asked to look at, I think, if I've got that right. Right. I don't seem to have anybody else wanting to come in, and so I'm proposing to go to the recommendations. Recommendations 21, 22, 23. We've noted the actions during the year supporting the development and use of risk management as a business tool. 22, we've considered the effectiveness of the Council's current risk management arrangements in providing reasonable assurance of effective and efficient operations. And 2.3, we will consider these proposed 2 risks as referred to in paragraph 311 for more detailed study. Members, that I think concludes the rest of the business. I have no further business. Hang on a second, somebody's come up in chat. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Thompson. I think that we should say thank you very much indeed to everyone, and we wish you well over this Christmas and New Year period. But I'm sure we'll all speak very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.